nature itself led us to be sentimental, but equanimous, opposite of passions. It opposed something to all impressions. It teaches us that we must die, so that we will become prudent. That is, that we don't rejoice like children over the favor of fortune, nor bemoan the disfavor of fortune like children. It followed the vivid joys with the weariness and the indifference, so that we don't, through imagination, think of fantastical happiness during them. It paired love, which absolves itself from the constraint of obligation, with many insults, the one which submits itself to order and law, with hardships, most of all with cold detachment, so that a man may not become the buffoon of his passion. It made so obvious the insignificance of human beings and their judgments, so that out of propensity we may not be without sensibility for their judgment, but also won't turn it into a thing which afflicts our heart. Immanuel Kant. In my last lecture, I discussed what affections and passions are to Kant. Affections are feelings that get out of hand, that get so strong that you cannot hide them, and that they push all your other feelings aside, that you become unable to compare your current state with your state as a whole. Right? The example was the rich man whose servant accidentally breaks some expensive cup and who gets angry over that, screaming at the servant, because obviously this rich man is unable, because of his affection of anger, to think of his life as a whole, to remember that he is still very wealthy, and all things considered, this cup is really of no significance. He really has nothing lost in his immense wealth. On the other hand, passions are not feelings that get out of hand, but rather they are desires that get out of hand. Again, they are desires that are so strong that they fully occupy you and that you become unable to compare this desire and its aim with the whole of your desires. So he who is passionately infatuated, or who hates with a passion, who wants revenge with a passion, he who has the passion for freedom, or the passionate lust for power, the passionate greed, the passionate lust for honor and reputation, is so obsessed with this one thing that he forgets other things and may even sacrifice other things, right? He who is passionate about his revenge may kill even if he goes to prison for that and loses everything else in his life because he's so obsessed with the revenge. Both make us lose our reason in a way, but in a different way. The affections make us lose our reason completely, become completely unreasonable. We become like wild animals that cannot be talked to, cannot be reasoned with. This feeling completely controlling us, but at least the affection only lasts for a time and will eventually end again. On the other hand, the passion lets us partially keep our reason. We can still use our reason as an instrument in trying to get whatever this passion wants, right? Again, the person who wants revenge, for example, can use his reason to plot the revenge, can pretend to actually be the person he wants to take revenge on, best friend, can act friendly to stab him in the back in the right moment. So in that sense, you still have your reason, but you only have it as an instrument. Your reason is completely subjugated to that passion. You cannot use your reason to reflect about this passion, about your life and your goals as a whole. You cannot ask your reason to not just provide you the means to reach your goal, but to actually set your goal for you, to actually think about what would be a good goal and if you should really follow the goal that this passion gives you. And unlike with the affections, this loss of reason is permanent. As long as you have this passion, you will not really be master of yourself. I talked about how both the affections and the passions are something we should get rid of or we should not even get into in the first place. That's not to say we should not have feelings or desires, but we should never allow them to get this out of hand and to enslave us. This is both against what morality demands and what prudence advises us. And this is a common theme in these lectures. I already said it several times, that contrary to this common belief that leading a moral life and leading a happy life, that there's this dichotomy between them, right? I either do what's right, and for that I sacrifice my own benefit, my own happiness, or I do what benefits me, but that means being selfish and abusing the rights of others, ignoring whatever happens to others. Kant shows that for the most part there are exceptions, but for the most part morality and prudence align. For the most part, the most moral life will also be the most happy life. Now, morality dictates that you don't get into affections and passions, because they can lead you to be immoral towards others, of course. They can lead you to do harm to others, right? Like if you're passionate about revenge, or if you are very angry, you may kill someone, or if you are passionately greedy, you may steal from others, or you may commit fraud or whatever. But also, and even more importantly, the affections and passions are immoral towards yourself. Because, and I gave a whole lecture about the duties towards yourself. In Kant's philosophy, morality is not just about how you treat others. First and foremost, it's about how you treat yourself, because it's about human dignity. You have to preserve, or you have to live in accordance with your own dignity as a rational being. And your dignity as a rational being lies in your freedom, in you not being slave to your instincts like an animal, but being able rather to set your own goals for yourself. Therefore, morality is about preserving your own freedom and, if you can, even increasing your own freedom. And since the affections and the passions take your reason away, make you unfree, enslave you, having them is not dignified and is therefore against the moral duties towards yourself. But also, as I say, prudence also advises you to not have affections or passions, because, well, very often they will make you unhappy. They may cause you distress. They may cause you harm. You become your own enemy, so to say. You stumble over yourself, as Kant would say. So really, if you are without them, that's better for you. Now, this is where I left off. And of course, some people might agree that, okay, having affections and passions might be immoral, might harm others, or might go against your own dignity. They may also agree that it is not prudent, that it is harmful to your own happiness, but they might claim that it is simply natural. It is how human beings are, and it is therefore impossible to be without them. Now, this would be very unaufklärt, because Aufklärung, what is usually, but wrongfully, I have a whole lecture about that, translated as enlightenment. Aufklärung is about having the posture of a perpetrator, while the unaufklärt people, those who are irrational, who cannot think for themselves, they have the posture of victims always. They like to say, we are not free, and therefore we are not responsible. But here Kant says, whatever man ought to do, he can do. I discussed that in the lectures on what is freedom and do we have a free will. You can turn to those lectures. Basically, Kant says, if we recognize something as our moral duty, then by admitting that it is our moral duty, that it would be good and right to do it, we, whether we want to or not, admit that it is possible for us. Because nothing can be our duty that is not possible. So, therefore, it must be possible. And indeed, Kant says, if you were to claim that you cannot be without affections or passions, and that therefore you are not responsible for what you do under an affection or passion, then this would or could be applied to any evil action, right? If someone is prone to get aggressive, to get angry, and one time in his, because he has such anger issues, in his anger he beats someone to death, and then later he may claim, yeah, okay, that was bad, I wish I hadn't done that. Of course you shouldn't kill someone in anger, but I couldn't help it. I do have these anger issues and I cannot get rid of this affection of anger. Kant says, if you were to accept that argument, that excuse, then you would have to accept everything, right? Then the next person might be a rapist and could also claim, well, yeah, okay, rape is wrong, I shouldn't have done that, but my lust was stronger than me, I couldn't help it, right? And another person might steal and might say, yeah, well, I can't control my greed. So if you allow for that excuse in a single instance, you have to allow for it in every instance, and then there is no longer any responsibility, any morality. So Kant is indeed a thinker of Aufklärung because he insists on people being perpetrators and not victims. He says we can control, in a way, our affections and our passions. And so, since this is both prudent and moral, this is very much what Kant advises. And Kant was, of course, influenced by the Stoics of antiquity. I already talked in the lecture about Kant's life, about his biography, about how even in school, when he was young, in high school, he would, of course, learn Latin and read some Latin works, but even beyond what he had to read for school, he would read on his own certain Latin works, or he had a small reading circle with two friends. They would buy books together and read them together, and yeah, they would read the ancients, and those very much impressed Kant. He always retained respect for the ancient Roman authors throughout his life, always liked to quote them, knew some Latin quotes by heart, even in his old age. And of course, many of the ancient Roman authors were themselves influenced by Stoic philosophy. And so Kant took up that influence. He also very much acknowledged that. And for example, one of his quotes that he likes, that he liked to quote, comes from the Latin author Horace, and it says, "Animum rege, qui nisi paret, imperat." This means something like govern your mind or govern your mood, for what doesn't follow leads or takes charge. Kant says that, sure, you could fight your affections and your passions, but that would be hard. That would be straining. And at the end of the day, it would mean constant conflict, and there's no guarantee that you would always win. If you don't go to war in the first place, then you don't have to win, Kant says. So instead of fighting your affections and passions again and again, like fighting windmills, you should rather try to attain some tranquility, some calmness of mind. You should try to get equanimity so that you don't have to fight at all. And again, this being master of yourself, being master of your own mind, this is something that is a moral duty anyways. A duty towards yourself, because as I already said, those duties are about freedom, about preserving, but also extending your freedom. And the more you become master of yourself and of your own faculties, the more you extend your freedom, Kant says. But also, it is prudent, because Kant says if you are master of yourself, of your own mind, then you are master of your fate. Not in the sense, of course, that you control anything that happens to you, but in the sense that you control how you react to anything that happens to you. So you are no longer dependent on your fortune or your misfortune. Rather, if something good, if something pleasant happens to you, then sure, you can enjoy it. But if something bad, if something unpleasant happens to you, then you don't have to cry and wail and complain about it, but rather you can take it with some calmness and dignity. And this indeed is where all philosophy leads to, Kant says. And indeed, he's not alone in saying so. I would argue this is indeed what all real philosophers say. And if it doesn't lead to that, then you're not a philosopher. If you don't have equanimity, you're not an aufklärt person, you're not someone who is master of himself, you are not wise. And of course, this is true for most professors who may be called philosophers, but really they are just scholars of philosophy. There, for the most part, is nothing very philosophical about them and about their posture in life. But this is true even for people who may be considered great philosophers by some, right? Consider the misanthropic, choleric Schopenhauer, who would have bursts of anger, who screamed at a serving maid so much that she got a shock, and he was a court ruled that he had to pay her, had to compensate her. Think of someone like Wittgenstein, who in his anger beat up little kids. I don't care what they have thought. I don't care what anyone thinks, how great, how genius their thoughts may be. Those are not philosophers. They are not wise. They did not attain calmness of mind. Now, of course, the question, when Kant says all philosophy leads to equanimity, the question is, of course, what does he mean by philosophy here? And Kant, I addressed this in my lectures on what is philosophy and what is wisdom, has a twofold concept of philosophy. To him, philosophy can mean philosophy in the school sense. That would be the professional philosopher, the scholar, he who has rational cognition out of concepts, the scientist, and more specifically, in a more narrow sense, the metaphysician, who deals with the ideas of God, of freedom, of immortality of the soul. But Kant also has what he calls the world concept of philosophy. And here the philosopher is the sage, is the wise person. And wisdom, again, I gave a whole lecture about what is wisdom to him. But wisdom is defined as setting your eyes on the whole, setting your eyes on the true purpose of humanity, not on parts that don't matter or that may only matter as means to the final purpose. And it is clear that here Kant is talking about this philosophy in the world sense, that Kant here is talking about wisdom. Wisdom gives you equanimity. And this is precisely where Kant is in agreement with the ancient Stoics, because Kant too has this ideal of the sage, of the wise person, who has what the ancient Greeks called ataraxia. That would be, you could say steadiness or calmness of the soul. Or what the ancient Greeks called apatheia, so apathy. That would be having no passions, right? Because pathos is the passion. And this precisely, ataraxia or apathy, is what we should have. What both according to morality and prudence we should strive for, Kant says. And I want to make the remark that the word ataraxia is not really a word that is used in normal life, and most people who are not scholars will probably not know what the word means. This is true, by the way, both in English and in German. While the word apathy, still it's probably a word for the educated, but it is used more in regular speech. Again, both in English and in German, like calling someone apathetic. And generally nowadays it has a negative connotation, right? And most people, when hearing Kant recommends apathy, would say, no, I don't think that's good. I don't think you should live with apathy. I think it's good to not have apathy. But this is due largely to a misunderstanding. Because nowadays, when people hear the word apathy, they will think of someone being indifferent or someone being unfeeling, right? Just not caring, not feeling anything. But that is not what the word apathy means. Apathy is not indifference. It is, again, as I already said, being free of pathos, so of passions. And that is how Kant means and uses the word. But I do think it is quite telling how people understand the word apathy nowadays. I think through this, our modern society betrays itself. Because clearly, the indifferent person is someone who is not moved, right? He doesn't care, and so he doesn't act. He, so to say, has no yes or no. There's nothing he is strongly for or strongly against. There's nothing that would make him move. And this is judged to be bad, and I would agree, this is bad, yes. But when we confuse this indifference with apathy, then the reason for that seems to be, to me, that people think that the human being is completely a sensual being. And so therefore, the only thing that can move him is his sensuality, is strong desires, is passions. And so people think that apathy is the same as indifference, because they think that without having passions, you cannot be moved, you cannot care about anything at all. And again, this shows that they view the human being as essentially an animal, as essentially only a sensual being. Because Kant would say, instead of being moved by passions, you can move yourself through reason. You can think about something and come to the conclusion, come to the insight that this is right, this is wrong. And you can care not out of your nature, not out of your passions, but because you want to care, because you make yourself care, because you understand that you should care. And indeed, this to him is freedom, right? I talked about this in the lecture on what is freedom, that freedom to Kant does not mean doing whatever you want, because why do you want it in the first place? Maybe it's just nature within you that wants it. Rather, freedom means having insight into what you should want and then actually following your insight, not following your drives, right? So the drug addict getting his drug gets what he wants, but clearly he's not free. His drive, his addiction is forcing him. If we were to reflect on whether he should get the drug, on whether that's good for him, and would understand that no, it's bad, he probably shouldn't take drugs, and then was able to follow this understanding, this insight, that would be freedom. And so if people equate apathy with indifference, if people think without passions you cannot be moved, you cannot act at all, then essentially they betray themselves as a-rationalists, as people who don't in the depths of their heart believe that there is such a thing as reason, as truly practical reason that can make you, or through which you can make yourself care about something, take an interest in something, do something. Here once again you have the difference between the unaufclared victim posture, this passivity, this thinking you are unfree, you must be driven by your passions, and the aufklärt perpetrator posture, believing in your own freedom, your ability to drive, to master yourself, and therefore in your responsibility. But anyways, again, Kant says you should strive for ataraxia, or for apathy. He says the wise person, the sage, will have equanimity, and therefore no pains, no misfortunes will truly affect that person. The only thing that person will truly feel pain about is his own misdeeds. So you do feel the pain of regret, of remorse, of having a bad conscience if you violated your moral duty, but this would be the only pain you feel. Anything else, anything that is just a physical pain or misfortune, right? Like having some sickness, or having some accident that hurts you, maybe that leaves you disabled or whatever, that is something that will not affect your mood so much if you have this equanimity. So Kant, as much as he is influenced by the Stoics, he does say that the Stoics went too far sometimes, that when the Stoics claimed the wise person could be happy and joyful even under torture, so basically claiming that our sensuality, our body, doesn't matter at all, This Kant says is clearly wrong. This is clearly an exaggeration. This is raving even. So he does not go quite as far as to say our sensuality and how we feel sensually doesn't matter at all. But he does say that it should not affect us much. Now, it's important to understand Kant correctly here, because Kant does say we should have equanimity. He does not say we should have indifference. And these are two very different things to him. Indifference to him means not caring, and therefore, as I already said, it means not being moved. Not being moved to action, not acting one way or another. So indifference means it's about our activity, not about our passivity. Equanimity, on the other hand, is not about whether we act or not. It's about how we feel. Namely, it's about our feelings, our moods, not being affected much by whatever happens to us. But that does not mean that we have to be indifferent. That does not mean that we cannot act. There is another pair of words, or rather of phrases, that Kant uses besides talking about equanimity and indifference, and that is that he says we should take things to heart, but we should not let things affect our Gemüt or take it to our Gemüt. Now, Gemüt is a word that appears often in Kant's writings, and I already mentioned in some previous lectures that it is hard to translate, but I think this is the lecture where finally I truly get a problem, because here I cannot just get around translating it. You can maybe translate Gemüt in some instances with mind or something like that, but I think here that doesn't work. The word Gemüt has two parts, actually. The first part is G, and G in German denotes a certain collective, right? So you have the word Gebirge, which means a mountain range. Berg means one mountain, and Gebirge means several mountains, therefore. Or you have the word Gebeine, which is an old word for your skeleton, right? Beine has the same origin as English bones, so yeah, your bones. And Gebeine is the collective of all your bones, so your skeleton. So therefore, the Gemüt is the collection of all your different moods. Now, what does mood mean in German? Essentially the same thing as in English, right? They are both Germanic languages. The words have the very same root. They are spelled differently, but it's essentially the same word. Yeah, mood means mood. So, how you are feeling? Do you have a good mood? Do you have a bad mood today? And so the Gemüt is basically the collection of all your moods, right? It's your maybe you could translate it with psyche. It's sort of your emotional faculty, your emotional psyche, right? Maybe it is helpful in this context to turn to Latin, because when Kant says take things to heart, but don't let them affect your Gemüt, he also gives Latin translations. And in Latin, you have the difference between the anima and the animus. And in this context, Kant translates Gemüt with anima and heart with animus. I'm specifically saying in this context because the word heart in Kant's philosophy actually has different meanings in different contexts. I already gave a lecture about why the good heart is not enough for morality, why morality is not about compassion and the good heart. In that context, heart is meant in a different sense. Also, the lecture about the radical evil, I talked about the evil heart. That again is a different sense of Kant using that word. Those must not be confused. But in this context, when he opposes heart to Gemüt, then Kant says heart means animus and Gemüt means anima. And in the Latin, the anima is our soul in the sense of our feeling, our sensitive, our receptive animal soul, right? It's what animates us. That's where the word comes from. That's also where the word animal comes from, of course, because animals are animated beings. They are beings that have an anima, so that are receptive, that can feel. And this is what Kant uses the German word Gemüt for. While on the other hand, the animus in Latin is more like our mind, our spirit, right? It's our soul, not in the sense of our passive, receptive, feeling soul, our animal soul. It's rather more our thinking, our reflective soul. So this is what Kant means by heart and Gemüt. And I will now simply translate Gemüt with Mut. It's not quite the same, since, as I said, Gemüt is the collective of all our moods. But I don't find a better English translation. Maybe psyche would also work. But I think I have now sufficiently explained what the word means in German. Also, as a note on that, it's actually related to the German word for equanimity, right? When Kant says people should strive for equanimity, the word he uses is Gleichmut. Gleich means equal or the same, and the other part, Mut, as you can hear, it's the same word that you find in Gemüt. It's the same word as the English word mood. So equanimity means having evenness, having sameness, having equality of your moods, right? The English word equanimity, of course, goes back to the Latin root, but here also you have this first part, equal, right? Like the German word gleich. And then the other part, animity, comes precisely from animus. So anyway, there's this pair of phrases. Kant says, take things to heart, but don't let them affect your mood. What does he mean by that? Well, taking things to heart to Kant is about being moved. It's about actions, right? And again, the heart to him here means the animus, so the reflective, the thinking soul, the spirit. So think of criticism. Let's say someone criticizes you, then you can say, both in English and also in German, that you take the criticism to heart. That means you think about it, you reflect on it, and assuming you come to the conclusion that the criticism is right and justified, then you let the criticism influence your actions, right? You try to incorporate it into your actions so that in the future you will act better. Now, On the other hand, if you let the criticism affect your mood, that would probably mean that you will feel bad. You will be like, oh, someone criticized me. That means they don't like me, or they don't think I'm the greatest. Now I feel bad. Or now I feel insulted, maybe because of the criticism. And this is precisely what you should not do. You should let the criticism affect your actions. You should take it to heart. You should act on it, again, assuming it's correct. Otherwise, of course, if you come to the rational conclusion that the criticism is wrong and unjustified, you may dismiss it. But in either case, you should not let it affect your mood. If the criticism is right and justified, then of course you should not feel bad about it. You should not feel insulted. You deserve this criticism. But even if it's undeserved, then okay, you can dismiss it. You don't have to act on it. But you should not feel bad. You should not feel insulted because of the criticism. When Kant says don't let anything affect your mood, what he's saying is the feelings as such, here you are passive, you are receptive. You cannot simply control what you feel, rather your feeling may be caused by some outside factors. But right, so if someone hits you, then of course you feel pain. There's nothing you can do against that. But you don't need to let that feeling affect your mood. Right? The singular feeling is not the same as a steady, permanent mood. And if you brood over your feelings, if you dwell on them too much, then you can increase your feelings. You can make them completely take up your mind, and then they may influence your mood, and that is not what you should do. Kant says even your own needs or your own misfortunes should not affect your mood. So if something happens to you, you have an accident, or you lose a loved one or whatever, that should not affect your overall mood. Because, again, this is something that would just make you unhappy. And it is also immoral towards yourself because it is undignified and pathetic. And he who doesn't bear his misfortune with strength, with courage, but who cries and laments about it, Kant would say is someone we would have to despise, is someone we could not take seriously anymore. No, you should bear whatever happens with strength, but that does not mean that you should not take it to heart, that you should not let it influence not the way you feel, but the way you act. Right? And this brings us back to the previous pair of words, equanimity and indifference. You are indifferent if you take nothing to heart. So if you don't allow anything to move you to action. But you have equanimity if you don't let anything affect your mood, if you don't allow anything to influence you too much in your feelings. And so Kant says, if there's injustice in the world, even if it afflicts your best friend, even if your best friend is suffering, you should have equanimity. You should not let it affect your mood, because that way you would just double the pain in the world, right? If somebody else is in pain and now you are so compassionate, you have so much sympathy that you feel bad for him too, that doesn't help him. It just harms you. Now instead of one person in pain, there's two people in pain. But of course, someone is befallen by some misfortune or some injustice happens to someone, while you should not let it affect your mood, even if it was your best friend, you should not be indifferent about it. Rather, you should take it to heart. You should let it drive you to action, and you should do whatever is in your power to help. So, hopefully, you see that being indifferent and therefore not taking anything to heart, or having equanimity and therefore not letting anything affect your mood, are two very different things. Unfortunately, they are often confused, again, because we do have this belief that you can only take something to heart, you can only be moved if you feel, because people are rationalists. They don't understand that you can also be moved because you reflect. You can be moved by your reason. And these two things are confused so much so that some people would say, I do not want this equanimity or apathy. I do not want to not let things affect my mood. And it's not necessarily the worst people who will say that. I mean, often the best people, especially when they are younger, may be afflicted by some sort of what we in German call Weltschmerz, right? Pain at the world, at the state of the world, a certain world weariness. And this is something that, while very painful, some people would not want to get rid of, thinking that they need this to stay good people, right? My own dad often told me that when he was a student, when he was like in his early 20s, someone else who was studying with him at some point told him, don't take everything to heart so much. And because people don't speak precisely, or they don't speak in Kantian terminology, of course, but she meant, expressed in the way Kant would say it, was, don't let everything affect your mood so much. But that's precisely the point, that people mix these two together. And so my dad's response was, I would rather die, I would rather perish than stop taking things to heart. I will not become cold and unfeeling. And to be sure, this is what many people do. Many, when they are younger, might still have some feeling for the world, might feel some pain at the injustice, at the evil in the world, and as a defensive mechanism of sorts, they create a wall around their heart. They turn their heart to stone and become more indifferent. But again, this is not necessary. My dad back then was right in a way, but he also was wrong in a way, which with time and with growing wisdom, he learned. Because you can develop equanimity, you can stop letting things affect your mood so much, letting things ruin your good mood, your constantly cheerful heart, as Kant would call it. That is what a wise person should have, while not necessarily turning indifferent, while not necessarily, just because of this equanimity, stopping to take things to heart and to let things move you to action. Equanimity to Kant is the feeling of the healthy soul. Already in my lecture on how morality is not about hatred for sensuality and about asceticism, I said that to Kant, a large or a main element of happiness in life is healthiness of body and soul. because, as I explained there further, if you are happy of body and soul, then you don't need much, and you have the strength to get the little you need for yourself. Now, more precisely, Kant says healthiness is the feeling of the healthy body, right? If your body is sick somehow, then you may feel pain. This feeling of the healthy body, which is in a way a negative feeling, right? Not negative in the sense of bad, but negative in the sense of the absence of something. It's the absence of pain. Like if you're in a healthy body, it's not that you are feeling constant, lasting pleasure, but you're not feeling any displeasure. You're not feeling any pains. And this sort of evenness or tranquility of your bodily feeling, this is the feeling of healthiness, Kant says. And with this, he equates equanimity as the feeling of the healthy soul. Again, if you have an unhealthy soul, if you have mental illnesses, if you have psychological problems, if you're depressed or very angry or whatever, you have all sorts of bad feelings in your soul. And the equanimity is the absence of these bad feelings. It's a feeling, again, just like the healthiness of your body, where you don't necessarily feel strong, constant pleasure, but you feel a certain tranquility, you feel the absence of any bad feeling, of any displeasure. Now, I want to get into two more terms that Kant uses in this context. Again, they're a bit hard to translate, because one of them is Empfindsamkeit, the other is Empfindlichkeit. As you can tell, even without speaking German, both words are closely related. They both come from Empfinden, and Empfinden means to sense, right? Empfindung is sensation. So both Empfindsamkeit and Empfindlichkeit are about having sensations in a way. But Empfindsamkeit means that you are not cold and unfeeling, that you are not incapable of having sensations. Rather, you can have sensations, very much so. But Empfindlichkeit means that you are overly afflicted by your sensations, that you're overly sensitive. Indeed, I would translate Empfindsamkeit with sentimentality. Of course, there's the problem that nowadays that word has sort of negative connotations, right? Nowadays, when you hear of someone being sentimental, you may think that he's prone to crying, to getting sad or whatever. That's not what I mean. Rather, I mean sentimental in the sense it was used in the 18th century, right? Think of Lawrence Stern's sentimental journey through France and Italy. It meant precisely being feeling, right? Feeling things, not being cold and unfeeling. And indeed, this sentimental is usually translated with empfindsam in German. So the sentimental journey gets translated as die empfindsame Reise. And Empfindlichkeit I would translate with sensitivity. Now, what Kant says is that being sentimental is the opposite of being indifferent, while being sensitive is the opposite of having equanimity. In other words, you should be sentimental, but you should not be sensitive. The difference is this. For example, Kant says the sentimental person notes or realizes every small insult, but the sensitive person feels every small insult, right? I mean, you can you can realize, because you have, let's say, very sharp senses, that there is something, but still it doesn't necessarily affect your mood, right? Or you can let every small thing affect your mood. A sentimental person would be someone who maybe feels the smallest changes of temperature, feels even if it gets 1 degree hotter or 1 degree less hot. But the sensitive person would be someone who, even if temperature falls by just 1 degree, immediately gets cold and needs a jacket or whatever. And what Kant is saying is that it is good to be sentimental. You should have very fine, very acute senses. Because while it is possible to be a righteous person without this sentimentality, you would probably be a very rough person. You would probably not be a very tactful person, right? Because you would not sense how others are feeling, and you would probably step on their toes without meaning to sometimes. So, therefore, sentimentality should not be rejected. Indeed, it should actually be cultivated. You should try to get more sentimental. But on the other hand, sensitivity is not something you should have. It's not something you should cultivate, because if you're overly sensitive, it means that every small thing affects your mood and can immediately get you into a different mood. And that, of course, should not happen. Here again, I think of my dad and his own philosophy, because in his philosophy, there's this distinction between primary and secondary feelings. The primary feeling being your inner feeling at your core that you create and cultivate yourself, and the secondary feeling being more on the outside, being more surface level, and being caused by outside factors, right? So let's say you're in a relationship, your primary feeling should be love for your partner. Let's say your partner does something that annoys you, and you start having a fight, and maybe now you may be angry at your partner, but that's just a secondary feeling. Primarily, you are still in love with your partner. This anger will probably pass, and even if right now, while you're still angry, something happened to your partner, like your partner was run over by a car, you would probably, because of your primary feeling of love, immediately forget this secondary anger. And you would probably be sad if your partner was killed now. You would not be happy because you happen to be angry right now. But the issue is that too often people don't hold contact with their primary feeling enough, and they get too carried away by the secondary feelings. So maybe they have 1 or 2 or 3 fights with their partner, they get angry, they get annoyed sometimes, and it makes them forget all about their love, and they break up because they focus more on the secondary feeling than on the primary feeling. And this I have to think of here, because I think when Kant calls about sensitivity, he means these secondary feelings, as my dad would describe them. These feelings caused by the outside, these feelings on the surface. If you're overly sensitive, then you have lots of secondary feelings, or you easily get lost in these secondary feelings. And Kant says that sentimentality is a strength, because it means in a way that you are more perceptive, that there's more you sense, and so therefore you have more that you can work with, right? Like, for example, you can be tactful because you sense the slightest nuances in how other people react to you, and what makes other people comfortable or uncomfortable. But what you sense stays at the surface, and you can, when you are sentimental, and you can decide to not let it affect your mood. You sense that there is something and you can work with that, um, but you don't let it get inside you and change your mood. But sensitivity, on the other hand, Kant says, is not a strength, it's a weakness. It makes you a slave to whatever affects you, to whatever sensations you receive. It turns you into an instrument that anyone can play on, allowing other people to easily change your mood, to easily make you feel bad or make you feel excited or whatever. And you kind of become like a leaf in the wind, that the wind blows here and the next moment the wind blows it in the other direction. And this again leads to unhappiness, but it's also simply not dignified for a human, for a rational being that should have autonomy, that should lead himself. If you have sentimentality yet equanimity, then you may feel, you may perceive the smallest nuances, nothing escapes your sharp senses, but you choose what you let truly get inside, what truly affects your mood. And as I already said, you should let nothing affect your mood, except your own misdeeds. The only pain you should feel is the pain of regret, of remorse, of a bad conscience. But even there, Kant emphasizes that this pain as such has no worth or should not overtake you. You should not endlessly beat yourself up over things you did and now they happen, now you can't undo them. Rather, even this has only worth if it moves you to become better, to change, and to in the future try to be a better person and to do better. If you only beat yourself up over your misdeeds without changing, then it's more self-righteous. Then it's just you in a twisted way making yourself feel better by feeling bad, right? Because you can now tell yourself, oh, whatever bad thing I did, I must be a good person because I feel bad about it. Now, if you ask, where does both equanimity and indifference, whose difference now is clear, I hope, where do they both come from? They come from what in normal speech you would call someone's character or someone's personality. But in my 2 previous lectures on why the good heart, why compassion does not make us moral, and on character, I already explained that what is usually called character or personality by Kant is separated into 2 different things. There is what he calls the mode of sense, that is, so to say, our personality as far as nature makes us. So largely our temperament that we have by nature. And on the other hand, there is what Kant calls the mode of thinking. And only that he really uses the word character for. The mode of thinking being our, so to say, personality, not insofar as nature made us, but insofar as we make ourselves, insofar as we reflect about how we should be, how we should act, and assume certain principles, and then act according to these rational principles. And Kant says that both the mode of sense and the mode of thinking can, of course, affect how we are. Indifference, so not being moved, right? Not letting anything affect your actions, not taking anything to heart, that is something that belongs to the mode of sense. That is something that belongs to your temperament, that you might have been born with or not. But on the other hand, equanimity, not letting anything affect your mood, not being overly sensitive, that is something that is not due just to temperament, but rather that you create for yourself, that belongs to your character, to the principles you assume. Of course, even the temperament, so even what you are by nature, can lead to something that is kind of similar to equanimity. There are, of course, people that have a more phlegmatic temperament, and they will not so easily be affected, be changed in their mood by whatever happens to them, or whatever they see. And so, if you happen to have a phlegmatic temperament, that might be helpful. That might make it easier to attain equanimity. And indeed, Kant says the phlegmatic temperament is the temperament of the sage. However, this temperament can lead to a sort of equanimity, to not letting things affect your mood, but it can also make you lethargic. It can also lead to you not really doing anything, so it can lead to a sort of indifference, to not taking anything to heart. On the other hand, having a choleric temperament, being hot-tempered, being easily agitated, sure, that can lead to you having no equanimity, that can lead to you easily getting aggressive, easily getting excited or whatever. But on the other hand, it could also maybe be a positive thing, because it can give you a certain energy, a certain fire that maybe can go into something productive, right? The choleric temperament can maybe work harder with stronger motivation, or the choleric temperament can maybe get into righteous anger and fight for justice. So both temperaments could lead to good or bad, which should show you that the temperament is a fickle or an untrustworthy thing, and we should not rely on our natural temperament. Rather, we should try to overcome it and to create for ourselves our own character, to follow certain principles. About character as such, about following principles, as I said, I already gave a lecture. But now, what about the equanimous character specifically? How do you get this equanimity? Well, Kant says the main thing you can do is to again and again reflect about how unimportant and insignificant life is. All the fortunes and misfortunes of life, all the pleasures and displeasures of life really don't have much worth, and also don't last for long. Kant says, reflect about how short life is. I mean, in this universe that is millions and billions of years old, and will continue for millions and billions of years, what is your short, insignificant life really? You should keep in mind that the only thing that truly matters, the only thing of value, is your own righteousness, is your morality, is you following the moral law, doing your moral duty, which is precisely why, again, not doing it, breaking the moral law, should be the only thing that affects your mood, that makes you feel bad. But if you keep in mind that all other things have not much value, then you will attain a state of equanimity where all these other things also don't get to affect your mood. This is something I will address further in the lecture after the next, when I will talk in more general terms about the posture of the wise person, and the posture that gets us the happy life, that is about what Kant calls the constantly cheerful heart, and what Kant calls the practical idealism. I will get more into that. But for now, it suffices to say that this very same principle, or this very same reflection that leads me to equanimity, realizing that life is short anyways, and that life as such does not have much value, and that the fortunes and misfortunes of life don't matter, that only my morality matters. This, of course, is precisely the outlook of the moral person, right? This is precisely the principle by which the righteous person will live. So, since equanimity leads to happiness, or leads to not having unhappiness, and we now see that we attain equanimity by assuming the posture of a righteous person, this should show you once again the close connection and close relatedness between morality and prudence. This should show you once again that the moral person will also be the most happy person, while being immoral leads to all kinds of unhappiness. Now, I do want to point out, since I am at this, that this is also where you can tell the difference between someone who is truly moral and someone who just is good natured or kind or compassionate or whatever by nature. I talked in my lecture about the goodwill, about how, according to Kant, it is only the goodwill, which matters in morality. Because as I explained there, to Kant, there's a difference about morality and legality. Our actions as such can be in accordance with the moral law. That means they have legality, but I can still possibly be a bad person, right? I use the example that someone is drowning in a lake, and you pass by and you see it and you jump in and pull him out. This action has legality. That is, it is the action that the moral law dictates that you should do. But the question is, why have you done it? If you have only done it because this person that was drowning happened to be your friend, your loved one, that you cared about, but if it had been a stranger, you would not have done it. Or if you only did it because you knew that this person is rich and you were hoping to get rewarded for saving his life or whatever, then despite the legality of your action, you have no morality in your heart. You're only a moral person, Kant says, if you act out of goodwill. So if you do what is right, not for any other reasons, but precisely because it is right, because you understand that this is what you should do. And here, with the equanimity, we have something that can tell us whether this is the case or not. Because there are some people where 99% of people that know them would say, oh, this is a good person. This person is so nice, is so kind, is always there for others, always helpful, always so selfless. This person is practically a saint. Yet, this person does not have equanimity. So, this person does let things affect their mood. Maybe this person gets sad easily, or scared easily. Maybe even this person gets angry easily. So maybe this person usually is kind and helpful and nice to everyone. But if you don't act how this person wants, if you maybe criticize this person or whatever, then maybe this person easily gets agitated and the kindness vanishes. And if that is the case, then this is not a good person. Then all their apparent goodness is fake. By fake, I don't mean that necessarily that they are playing a role. that they are faking it on purpose and consciously. No. It is real in the sense that it might really be their nature. Maybe it is a very good natured person. Maybe it is a person who by nature is very kind, is very compassionate, and so on. But this is not an accomplishment. This is not something that should be praised. Your nature is what you were born with, or what you were shaped into by the way you were raised. It is not your own decision. And therefore, it does not give you merit. Maybe this nature makes you beneficial to the people around you, but it does not make you a good person. And I myself had to learn this. Had to learn this even painfully. That there can be people that seem to be kind most of the time, seem to be good, even almost saint-like people, but you cannot truly rely on them and on their morality. In specific situations, they are still able to do very bad things, to act with disregard towards others, because their morality is no true morality that comes out of themselves, out of their own goodwill, out of their reason. It is just good actions that come out of their nature. And again, having equanimity or not is what lets you tell the difference. Because if the morality truly came from a goodwill, from someone having firm moral principles, well, those very same principles, telling himself only the moral law matters, nothing else matters, would necessarily lead to equanimity, would necessarily lead to nothing else being able to affect his mood. If, on the other hand, a person does not have these principles, if a person does let anything affect their mood, then it can still be that by their nature, by the way they are affected, it most of the time leads to kind actions, but they will not have equanimity. They might be overly sensitive, in fact. And this way you can tell that this is not truly a good person. Here you can think of Nietzsche and his critique of slave morality, where the weak pretend that their weakness is a virtue. Nietzsche uses this image, this allegory of the birds of prey and the lambs. Right, the lambs are peacefully eating grass on the meadow, and sometimes the birds of prey come and take a lamb and eat it. And so the lambs say, oh, the birds of prey are evil, because they eat us and they kill, while we, the lambs, we don't kill anyone, we don't eat anyone, so we are good. And this, of course, is very dishonest, Nietzsche says, because, well, they are lambs. It's not like they consciously and out of their goodwill chose to become vegetarians. It's just that by their nature they are harmless and don't eat meat. This is not their own virtue. This does not give them any merit. It's like if an impotent person would praise himself for his chastity. Now, if you have a very strong libido and somehow you came to the rational conclusion that you should not act on it, you should not have sex, and then actually were able to follow this conclusion, to be stronger than your libido, to actually do keep chastity, okay, maybe this could be praised as some sort of strength, some sort of virtue. But if you are impotent, your chastity is not a virtue. And likewise, if you are just kind by nature, this kindness is not a virtue. It is a virtue if you are acting with kindness out of principles. And again, those very same principles this very same strength, and after all, virtue means strength. I mean, it comes from the Latin word vir, which means man, so it's like manliness, strength. This very same virtue, this very same strength of character will also give you equanimity. Now, everything I said in this lecture is quite untimely, as good philosophy should be, because our age is probably the most sensitive age there has been. There probably wasn't any time when there was less equanimity, or equanimity was less talked about, right? I'm not necessarily saying that everyone had it amongst the ancient Greeks, but at least there was a class of, let's say, intellectuals, there was a class of thinkers who at least talked about how everyone should have it. And nowadays we barely even have this. Nowadays, being overly sensitive, having no equanimity, letting everything affect your mood, is perfectly normal. And it's treated in many regards as perfectly acceptable, and it's not even criticized or problematized or questioned. And indeed, there are some who turn this into a principle for politics or for morality, right? Think of the woke left, that are so sensitive that, not sentimental but sensitive, so they do let every little thing, every small slight affect them, and they will feel totally justified in being affected and will say it's your fault for doing this small thing, right? Like they talk about microaggressions, for example, which might just be a wrong word that somebody used without even meaning any harm, without even thinking about it. Or they will talk about being triggered, right? Now we live in an age where everyone is triggered by everything. And I mean, in the very word triggered, you already have this victim posture, right? I am passive. I don't control myself. I'm not master of my own mood. Rather, others can trigger how I feel. As Kant says, you are an instrument that others can play on. This is, of course, pathetic. But these people, again, like the woke people, they will demand that you don't trigger them, that you give them trigger warnings, that you give them their safe spaces. They will think that it is not their job to develop equanimity, so to clear themselves out, to live with more dignity like rational beings should, but rather they think it's everyone else's job to keep them safe from even the slightest possible displeasure. And to such people, Kant will probably say, man up. And then such people would probably respond to Kant, oh, you are saying man up, so in other words, you are equating being a man with having strength, having courage, being rational, having dignity. How dare you? That's sexist, that's misogynist, or whatever. So, in other words, you cannot help these people. They will reject any help. The help as such will be taken as an insult again, will again affect their mood. They will not reflect about this help rationally and about whether it's right or wrong. Rather, you can reach out your hand to help them. They will perceive it as a fist that is there to hit them. You can give helpful advice. All they will hear is attacks and insults. So there is no reasoning with such people, but there is reasoning about such people, meaning we can understand what's going on here. And what's going on with this sensitivity of our age is that Kant would say it's an issue of culture, of civilization. The savages, Kant would say, will probably not be overly sensitive, because they have real problems, right? If you are sitting in a war zone being bombed, or if you are starving, because there's a famine where you live, then you probably won't be overly sensitive towards microaggressions. Then you probably won't be triggered because someone hasn't used the made up pronouns that you want to be used for yourself or whatever. So, and I mean, this is not an insight that only Kant has. This is sort of a common insight, right? When we nowadays talk about first world problems, people having first world problems means precisely this, that only if you live in the first world, in the civilized world, if you live in a world where you have no real problems, no real hardships, only then will you even have these problems. Only then will you be so sensitive towards such things. And the reason for that Kant would give is quite simple. Kant says, if I'm feeling good, then I don't feel it. The only thing I really feel, and this is true more and more the less sentimental I am, the only thing I feel is really if my baseline feeling is significantly increased or decreased, right? Let's take food and how you feel about food. If your regular feeling is significantly decreased, that is, if you are hungry, that is something you feel. You feel your stomach hurting, calling out for food. Likewise, if it is increased, if you eat lots and you stuff yourself, that is also something you feel. You will now feel very full in your stomach. But when neither is the case, you are neither very hungry nor very full, right? You're regularly well fed. You had your meal a while ago, you're not hungry yet, but you also don't feel the fullness. Then you don't really feel your stomach at all. And that is true for all kinds of feeling, right? Likewise with sexuality, you can feel turned on, you can feel sexually needy, even to the point maybe where it becomes painful, like when someone is blue-balled, or you can, like right after orgasm, you can feel sexually satisfied and exhausted, but regularly, when you're neither very satisfied nor dissatisfied, just going about your life, not having sexual thoughts, you won't feel your genitals. And so Kant says, since we only feel, since we don't feel our regular feeling, so to say, we only feel when it's significantly increased or decreased, this is true no matter how good or how bad our regular feeling is. So if our regular feeling is already pretty bad, then someone saying something insignificant, maybe something a little thoughtless or a little tactless or whatever, will not very much decrease our feeling, because we are already not feeling so great. So this doesn't change much. But if our baseline is pretty good, if we are living in the first world and we are not having any real problems, then even a small attack may feel like a big decrease to our regular feeling. And that is precisely why people become so sensitive. Kant says, if they become so sensitive, they must actually be very happy. I would agree with that, but only if we interpret it in the right way, and that is objectively speaking. They must objectively be happy, meaning they must have an overall good life where they are not lacking much. Subjectively, of course, those people are probably not very happy. Those people would probably say that they don't have a happy life because it's so full of issues, so full of them constantly being triggered or whatever. And here I want to remind you what Kant says about happiness, or rather about pleasure and about displeasure or pain in general. I already gave an earlier lecture about his theory of pleasure and pain, where I said that it's, according to Kant, about our feeling of vitality. Pleasure is the feeling of my vitality being increased. So I'm in pleasure when I feel very much alive. And I'm in displeasure when I somehow feel my life being threatened, when my vitality is blocked or decreased. Now, what this means in regards to equanimity is that Kant says equanimity means someone having the source of his vitality, the source of his life in himself. This is why he will have inner strength. This is why he will have courage. Indeed, in my own philosophy, I have a whole theory of courage that I don't want to get into here too much, but I would say that yes, this equanimity or courage, or also the constantly cheerful heart, is more or less one thing. Courage is an inner strength to deal with all the challenges of life and to not feel overwhelmed, to not feel lacking, to not feel too weak to deal with these challenges. And indeed, the German word for courage is Mut. So it's just this word mood, as in good mood, bad mood. If you don't have a specific mood with an adjective, but just mood, that is the German word for courage. So the German word for equanimity, Gleichmut, always having the same mood, is therefore very close to having courage. I would say courage is precisely this equanimity where nothing affects your mood, where, right, if you easily get frightened, if you easily get worried or whatever, you clearly don't have equanimity. You clearly do let things affect your mood. But anyways, Kant says the equanimous person does have the source of his own vitality in himself, and therefore he can make himself feel good in a way. He can increase his own vitality, or at least make sure it doesn't decrease too much. While the person easily affected will constantly have the feeling of his vitality increasing or decreasing, be caused by outside factors. And here I remind you once again that the affection to Kant is a feeling that is so strong that it makes me unable to compare this feeling and to compare this moment to the sum of all my feelings, of all my life, right? Again, think of the rich person who gets angry and screams at his servant for accidentally breaking a cup. He is caught up in the moment, and losing this one possession, this one cup, feels like an attack on his vitality, and he is unable to think of the whole of his life and of how wealthy he still is, and how this one cup really doesn't do much damage to his wealth. Well, the person with equanimity will do precisely the opposite of the person who has an affection. He will not be caught up in the moment. He will not be caught up in a singular feeling, but rather he will always think of the whole of his life. And that is precisely why he will hardly ever be truly unhappy and devastated. Because Kant says, if you are not getting caught up in the moment, if you are truly considering the whole of your life, almost always, even in bad situations, your life as a whole will still be decent, right? I mean, even if you, I don't know, um, lose a loved one, sure, you may be sad now for some days, for some weeks, for some months. Um, but if you consider the whole of your life, you will probably say to yourself, okay, but I still have a roof over my head, I still have food, like I'm not homeless on the street or whatever. Um, I'm not in a war zone. I'm still healthy of body and mind, and maybe I also still have other dear people around me, right? I still have other friends or family members, even though I lost this one person. So while this is not nice, I don't have to be utterly devastated and feel like my whole life is over now because this one person was ripped from me. Um, I can still, if I manage to consider the whole of my life, um, understand that all in all, my life is fine, right? Or let's say you have some sickness or you have some accident, like you were in a car crash and you lost both your legs. Okay, that sucks. Um, you will now be in a wheelchair for the rest of your life, but still, you could tell yourself, okay, but at least otherwise, I'm healthy. I still have my arms, I still have my eyes, my mind is intact, so I can still think, I can still understand. And again, maybe I still have good people around me, I still have my friends, my family that are helping me. Um, so while this is a loss, while this does suck, um, overall, my life still has more good than bad components. And if you manage to, in all situations, no matter what happens to you, still think of the whole of your life, and of the sum of all your feelings and the sum of all the goods in your life, the sum of all your fortune and misfortune, most of the time, Kant says it will be a net positive. This reminds me of a friend of mine who uses to half jokingly say, um, whatever misfortune befalls you, it could always be worse because you can always imagine also having a headache, right? Um, so let's say you lose both your legs. Well, besides losing your legs, you could also have a headache. Or let's say a dear person dies, this person could be dead and you could have a headache on top of that. So no matter what happens, he says, even if the worst things happen to you, it could be worse if you had a headache. And if you do have a headache, you can still imagine that you could have a stronger headache, so it could still be worse. And so my friend says, unless you have the strongest possible, the strongest imaginable headache, um, then you can always tell yourself things could be worse. Only if you have the strongest headache possible, then you are truly fucked. This leads me to a last point, and that is that equanimity necessarily goes both ways. You cannot get rid of certain kinds of pain without also getting rid of certain kinds of joy. Either you do let the things around you, the things that happen to you, affect your mood, then it can affect your mood in a bad way and in a good way, or you gain a certain tranquility of mood, a certain equalness of mood, where nothing can change your mood much. That means nothing can change your mood for the worse, but also nothing can change your mood for the better. And that is again what makes this whole philosophy so untimely, right? Um, because nowadays, when people think of happiness, lots of them think of intense pleasure. Lots of them think of excitement, of partying. Lots of them, lots of people will say, "Oh, life should be an adventure," and so many would probably reject what Kant is suggesting and what other philosophers would equally suggest, because they will say, "Oh, but then life is too boring." Well, you cannot argue about this point, really. It's really up to you how you want to live your life. But you should be aware that if you want a life that isn't boring, then it will also be a life necessarily that involves lots of pain. You should be aware that asking for adventures instead for a quiet life at home means asking for hardships also. And so those people who seek intense pleasure and excitement, their life necessarily is a roller coaster. If you seek these heights, you will also have your downs. You cannot get up without getting down again. And indeed, even if you could, if you would be up constantly, you would not feel it. Again, to Kant, pleasure is a feeling of the increase of my vitality, meaning that the lower my vitality is, the more it can be increased, the more pleasure I can feel, right? I mean, the person dying of thirst, if you give that person a glass of water, he will probably, while drinking it, have such an intense pleasure that you, if you never were dying of thirst, can probably not even imagine. So, if you really want this pleasure, you will have to make yourself die of thirst first. The question is, do you really want that? Or would you rather give up that possible pleasure, but therefore not have to go through that pain first? Right, with the roller coaster, the deeper it goes, the more it can go up again. Or likewise, if you think of pleasure, of lust, of good feeling as a firework, the firework is brightest in the night. So you need the darkness. Otherwise, you won't see it. If everything is bright and sunshine and happy, then the firework will not be all that exciting. So, what Kant, or rather the philosopher, because this is really where all sages of all ages are more or less in agreement, what they suggest for a happy life is not seeking excitement, not seeking to party or something like that, but rather you should not be such a dopamine junkie. You should rather search for a more quiet, a more calm happiness. This is precisely what Kant means when talking about the constantly cheerful heart. I myself, my life's motto since I was a little child was always, I want to be happy and cheerful. Not I want excitement. And looking back, this was me having a propensity for philosophy already, right? Like, for example, I remember one scene in high school. I must have been like 15 or 16. I didn't know anything about philosophy yet. I hadn't read a single line of Kant. But I already had a certain equanimity. And one day in physics class, the teacher would read out our grades, and physics was a subject that was especially hard to many, where they had very bad grades. And the teacher read out that I had a 1, which is the best grade in Germany, so it's like an A. And I calmly took in that information. I mean, certainly I was content. Maybe I gave a content smile, but that's it. And a classmate of mine who would probably have been elated. I mean, he could not even dream of a 1. He would probably have been elated at a 2 or at a 3 for a grade. He actually got angry at me. Like, he jumped out of his seat and he was like, luck, be happy already. I was happy in my own calm way. Like, of course I was happy about having a good grade. but I would never have jumped up from my seat in excitement and screamed in joy at the great. Like, this is just not something I did. Also at other occasions, like I never got people who would scream in excitement at a football game. I mean, by all means, if you're interested in football, okay, watch your game, have fun. But how can you get so invested? How can you get so excited over someone kicking a ball between two posts that you would actually jump up and scream? Um, that seems kind of silly to me and undignified. And again, if you are like that, if you are capable of this sort of excitement, then you're also capable of all kinds of displeasure. I mean, that same classmate of mine, yes, he could get very excited. He could cheer loudly if, for example, in PE class he scored a goal. But he was also someone who could get very easily frustrated and angry and scream at people. And my point is that one is related to the other. You cannot possibly have one without the other. Either you have equanimity in both directions, or you do let things affect your mood easily. And so the question is, what do you want from life? To those that want excitement, that want adventure, it's not that they will say, okay, I try to attain equanimity and I just fail. It's that they don't even try to have it. They don't want it. It seems not desirable to them. It seems boring to them. But I would claim that no one who was like that and who later became more wise, became more aufklärt, and attained equanimity, no one desires to go back. No one will say, oh, I miss this sort of pleasure that I had while partying. If you truly attain the constantly cheerful heart that Kant talks about, you will much prefer this calm contentness with your life in all situations, because these outer things that happen to you just aren't that important to you. You will much prefer that to the constant roller coaster of excitement and of devastation or angriness or sadness or whatever. But that's what I have to say about Kant's stoicism and his thoughts on equanimity. I previously said that to Kant, happiness is about independence. And now in this lecture and also the previous one, I talked mainly about independence from yourself, independence from your own feelings and desires, independence from your own psyche in a way. There's also the other side, independence of the world, of the things in the world, not needing much, being able to abstain. And that is also something Kant suggests. There he is not so much stoic, so the Stoics would probably also to a large degree agree with this, but rather there he is more an Epicurean, influenced by Epicurus, and that is what I want to discuss in my next lecture. My deep thanks be to my supporters: Leo Allmann, Cenk Kubilay Altu, Thomas Doringer, Kim Giamatti, Alan Hansen, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Ökobong, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, Spendierhosenträger, Ron Suhl, as well as to all others who support me and my aufkläring cause.